I want to go to. You have a pile of papers on your left, I think. Um, so, want to discuss a little bit about upskilling, or upskilling is a strong word, but just staying up with new stuff, or just understanding new things, or staying at the bleeding edge of tech or deep learning. So, let's start with papers. I think. How many papers? So, why do you read papers? How is reading papers useful? And how many papers you might read, let's say, in a week?
Great question. For usually, historically, it's like been completely irrelevant, right? To read papers, you might not learn the applied knowledge. Maybe very much so, like 10% of the knowledge becomes applied. With LLMs, it's like a different landscape, right? Because like the applied research and even bleeding edge overlaps so much that it's like sort of necessary in that sense, because a lot of these papers are just talking about prompting, which you can fire up GPT 3.5, anyone can, and you can test that technique if it works, or you can use the API, connect a vision module, see if that works. So in that aspect, I think reading papers is good. But before that, make sure you've like played around with the API, applied it. There's a really great cookbook. Play around with open source LLMs. There's H2O GPT. It's also for free. You can also try it for free. You can download it, run it. Once you've done that, papers can be helpful. I've been writing paper summaries every day for at least, I think, more than 100, more than 150 days now. The reason why I do it is I quite like to stay on top of the LLM research. It's some topic that like really excites me. It excites me more than anything else in deep learning ever did historically. I still don't understand why. How many papers do I read in a week? I read like 5 to 8 papers every day. If I don't in one day, I like sort of pick up the next day. So like I try to catch up with that. So I don't know how many that becomes in a week, but quite a few.
5 to 8 every day.
Mhm.
So, what is the like? How do you go about reading a paper? Like, I mean, can you walk us through that? Like, which aspects do you double down, and is there like when you're reading a paper, do you also, let's say there's a reference made? Do you go back to a different paper then, or do you just stick to this paper? So, can you just walk us through the process as well?
Sure. So when I say read, I actually read these. I skim through more, but I actually read these cover to cover. 5 to 8. I probably skim much more than that. Um, I start by going through the introduction and then the conclusion. If I like those, then I start going through the paper. With LLMs, the papers are so similar that I've like sort of gotten really fast at it. I sort of know what to expect. Have started recognizing benchmarks, and in my experience, there's like no way around it. So I have to like go through a lot of papers to become good at it, or fast at it at least. I don't think I'm really good at it. Still figuring out how to effectively pass through them. What I look for in a paper is also very curiosity driven. So any paper summary I write out of, I'm of course not sharing all the papers I read, right? Uh, so any paper I write is the one I really liked, and it's again like completely dependent on my own interest. In the sense, I found a technique to be really cool. I'm trying to think of one that came up recently. Maybe it's an architecture, maybe it's a prompting technique, maybe how you're connecting these models together, stuff like that. So for example, today I read about how you can sort of do prompt boosting. So instead of XGBoost, you prompt a model to summarize tabular data and then put it into ADA boost and run a model through that, predictive model through that. So that was a cool paper I found today. But again, very random, very much all over the place.
And when do you like do you these 5 to 8 papers or more than that? Is there like, do you schedule a time where, let's say, um, maybe early mornings, or maybe once you wake up, the first thing you like to do is maybe, let's say, read a paper, or do you spread those across chunks, or how does that work for you?
Depends on the mood as well, honestly speaking. But ideally, under the most ideal circumstances, I wake up early, so around 5, sometimes earlier than that. Spend the first few hours reading the papers that I have in my list. And I missed a question from earlier, which was if I go through the reference graph. No, I don't. But I make notes. If I like, if there's like a very strong reference and that looks really cool, I'd make a point, add it to my list, and then like get around to reading the paper later on. Most of the times I don't, because the list keeps growing. But yeah, ideally start in the morning, read some papers. Then once I'm done with my day, I'd probably go out and read some more uh, outside.
And finding these papers is, I would assume, like one way is obviously references of the paper that you're currently reading will have some like new papers to read. Apart from that, is that the way you discover new papers, or
There's like many people that tweet about papers, so I check out every paper AK tweets about. There's like a link as well on Hugging Face now. I follow that. There's Reddit. There are different lists. There's papers with code, and I do check all of these things quite regularly. So it like comes from all of these streams, sort of daily.
so one issue that I have, not issue, but in the sense, one thing I'm curious about is the rate of revolutionary papers or papers with significant contributions happen very, if like uh, infrequently, like very rarely. Like a technique which is really revolutionary, or an architecture which is really pushing the state of the art, may happen. I don't know, maybe in deep learning case once in 6 months or once in a year per se. Um, but you are going through papers very aggressively on a daily basis. So do you feel like most of the papers that you read are not really adding a lot of value to you as well?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think if they do or if they do not. So I think for the papers that I skim and choose not to read, I found them like to be very very uh, minimally influential. But at least in LLM space, there's so much to go through, right? So I'm still going through the historic pile of, let's say today I read Flan T5, and before that, yesterday or last week, I think I was going through the Instruct GPT. So even these influential papers are so many, and you can still learn so much that there's still so much to go through. And then even with the everyday papers, Claude 2 came out 3 days ago. Its model card is a technical report which I went through. I learned some things there about how they actually improved, stuff like that. So like my baseline has sort of shifted in the sense I'm not looking for SOTA, I'm just looking for techniques or ideas to stay informed about. So that's what I currently seek through papers, and not necessarily like a great benchmark or breakthrough.
What is the best paper you've read? Do you have like a paper that you feel is like completely blew your mind, and
PJ Reddy had written this like really famous, really funny YOLO paper. I don't know if you remember. So that's the best ML paper ever written, in my opinion.
Okay, okay.